Welcome to the Actual Fluency Podcast. Each week you'll find inspirational, motivational interviews with some of the world's best language learners, industry experts, all trying to help you to learn foreign languages better, faster, and more efficiently. And here we go. This episode is brought to you by italki, the world's best tutoring platform. So if you've been struggling to find a tutor online, or if you just want to enhance your language learning, I highly recommend checking out italki. You can get a $10 free credit after purchasing your first lesson on italki by going to actualfluency.com/italki. That's ITALKI. Hello everyone and welcome to episode 138 of the Actual Fluency Podcast. Today I'm joined by Elisa Polese, who is going to talk to us about learning multiple languages and even teaching multiple languages. So if you have a teacher who speaks a lot of languages, you might be interested in learning several of them at the same time. And Elisa gets into many ideas of why that's a good idea, but also how can we avoid getting confused when we're learning multiple languages, because that's something that a lot of people are a little bit worried about when they try to tackle several languages at once. We'll also get around a few other topics like grammar and school learning versus modern learning, and it's a very great episode, so I hope you'll enjoy the talk with Elisa, and I'll see you in the next one. First of all, thank you so much for coming and taking the time to be here with me today. I really appreciate it. And I think I've been, I don't know if I asked you to be on the show before or we talked about it before at one of the conferences, but I definitely have been thinking about having you on the show for many years. I've seen you at many of the conferences, so I'm really happy that we could make it happen here in episode 138. Do you want to start out by give the listeners a little introduction to who you are, where you're from, and what kind of languages you've been working on in your life?
Sure. Thank you very much for inviting me. So my name is Elisa. I come from Italy. I started learning language when I was 8, but actually just French, because I went to France and I just loved the language, and I decided I will learn French. And this is what I did. At school, I had French, and I noticed that I just loved languages. And I went abroad with my parents, and I loved the idea to be able to communicate with people. But I started learning other languages much later. So more or less when I went to the university. And before that, I just tried to learn a couple of things on my own, but without a real method, I must admit.
It's difficult without a method, and I'm sure we'll talk about your method later that you've come to now. What languages did you study at university?
At university, so I studied to be an interpreter. So I studied English and French, and but during my university studies, I also studied Spanish, Arabic, Hungarian, and yeah.
Wow, how was that in classes or in just what? How did you study all these languages? Did the university offer all of them?
Yes. So the
Wow.
ones that I mentioned, yes. So I was studying to be an interpreter, and there were languages. So I had to pick some languages, and other languages were more like a bonus if I wanted to. And of course, I wanted to.
You just picked everything, everything possible.
No, unfortunately, no, I haven't. But yes, I also had to study for my exam, so I didn't have the time to pick everything. But yes, my dream would be, to go back and study all the languages which were offered.
Yeah, I can understand. So your dream was going into university to be an interpreter.
Yes.
Right. Did you ever do that?
Yes. I worked as an interpreter and a translator, and I still work partially as an interpreter and translator. But I love teaching, so it's with the time I understood that I love interpreting, and my eyes so I'm so happy when I can interpret, but at the same time I love helping people And when I interpret, I don't get this feeling, and when I teach, I do. So this is what I understood, that I just
Hmm.
yeah, that I just like it so much.
Yeah, I understand. And yeah, interpreting is one of those careers that a lot of people listening to the show are interested in. It's a very popular topic. Do you have any tips or advice for people who are, let's say, younger and maybe looking to university and want to do interpreting as a full-time career? Is there anything they need to know that's not maybe super obvious for if you don't know?
Um, so what I learned afterwards was, on one end, it really helps if you are someone who can keep calm at any time if you want to be a simultaneous interpreter, because there will be times where you cannot really control what is going to happen. I mean, what I mean is, you don't know what people are going to say, and yeah, you have to go with the flow. And sometimes it can happen that they say things that you're not really. So you can prepare as much as you want, but you cannot control what kind of words people are going to use. So keep calm, and this one thing, and then I would say that the one thing that I didn't expect at the beginning, although maybe it's maybe very obvious so for others, is that most of the time you don't work, so you can work with one interpreter next to you according to what kind of interpreting you are doing.
Hmm.
But I I don't know. Somehow I didn't think about the fact that it's a more, I don't want to say lonely job, but normally if you don't work for a company, you are somewhere on one day and somewhere else on another day. It depends where you work for, so who you work for. But I'm a very social person, so I think I prefer, I can I can really get in contact with people, and we can talk about different things. And interpreting, you are more like a translator of words or meanings, or um, it's also nice because you help achieve a goal. You have it depends what kind of interpreter you're doing, like mediator or simultaneous, or different. There are different ones.
Hmm.
So it's very nice, but yeah, if you enjoy too much to be with people, then maybe another job is better.
Right, I've seen some of the conference interpreters. They're stuck in these little booths and they're
Mm.
just by themselves. So that can be lonely, I guess, as well if that's your main focus,
Mm-hmm.
is sitting in these.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah.
interesting. For
So.
me, it sounds very
Mhm.
difficult. Obviously, it's a very tricky position. You need to be very
Mhm.
good at both languages, or I guess even more languages in some
Mhm.
cases. So for me, I don't think I could ever do it honestly in any language. It's
Ah.
too scary.
Mhm. Ah, I don't think it's sorry. It's true that you have to be very good at both languages or more languages, but it's what I think it's not just knowing a language, but be able to yeah, to translate it in the right way, according to so many criteria and rules. When yeah, so this is more difficult. It's not enough to know a language. You really need to learn a bit of a technique, or
Mm,
yeah, it's a. But anyway, so cannot say that it is not a challenging job, but I think it's a very interesting job. So yeah,
definitely.
it requires a bit of effort, but so many professions do that. I
Yeah,
mean.
yeah, of course. It would be interesting if it was too easy, I would say. So that's good. What did you do? Did you do that right after university, or did you have some other language projects in between? And how is it looking for your language projects after that? Did you go back and have some projects that you studied just for the sake of it on your own, or did you follow any other like programs after that?
Mm, so my path at university is quite long, because I have more than one degree, because I love studying, I love learning. So I first studied interpreting and translating, and then I went to work and I used my languages, but I really wanted to improve other languages. So I went back to university. And then I did another type of interpreting. I did simultaneous interpreting, liaison interpreting, and consecutive interpreting plus translation. And then what I did was I studied again, and I studied communication in international organizations because I decided that I wanted to be able to do something else, not only interpreting, but also something that I could apply everywhere, like in a company, let's say. This is why when I studied communication in international organizations, so I was very lucky. I could choose most of my exams. So apart from communication, I studied IT, law, economics. So I was very happy about the opportunity to learn different things I didn't know before.
Yeah, that's a big package to have. Lots of languages and then IT, law, and economics. I mean, those are the big topics. So that's a good package to choose. And what happened next?
I apart from working, so since I was 20, so when I was 20, I started teaching, and I loved it, and I always done it until now because I just like it very much. And then what I decided, then I worked and studied again. I worked in companies in different roles, let's say, but I also worked as a teacher, of course, in different countries. And I decided to study again and I got a master in teaching and also CELTA, so the certificate of Cambridge University to teach English. And yeah,
Right. So those are some
this is
good
it.
starting points for teaching. And is that what you do mainly today?
Yes, so I translate, but I mainly teach. Um, I teach several languages, and I also teach several languages at the same time according to what students need. So, for example, what I realized in these years is that, for example, uh, I don't know. I taught Italian in French and French in Russian and Russian in Spanish and German in so in so many combinations, and it was very interesting to be able to talk to so many people from different countries. And yeah, mm,
Yeah, definitely. That's the
yeah, that.
triangulation in a way, where you use a third language to learn a second language, or a second language to learn a third language, or teach a third language. And what kind of
Mhm.
students do you find? So for, let's say, you're teaching in German, you'd find people with native German, I mean German speakers, or
Mhm.
would they be like L2, like
Mhm.
people who have actually learned German to a high level, who now wants to learn French, and you do that, or how does
Ah,
it work?
okay. I'm quite open. I think that as in when you teach audios, you cannot. I don't think it's. So I've I've met teachers who say, "Okay, this is my method, and we only use that,"
Hmm.
or "I only work in this way." I think you can do maybe. I don't want to discuss whether it's right or wrong, but you can do it maybe with children if you're really sure it really works, so you have to teach in a certain way. I don't know, but I think with audience doesn't work because since we are in most cases we are not obliged to learn languages. We want to either because it helps can help our career, or because we want to move somewhere, or because our partner is coming from another country, or because we want to go on holiday, or we need it for the company. Then I think students have a say in that. So, for example, when I learn a language, I love learning, studying just in that language. Let's say that I want to improve my Greek, then I prefer when the lesson it's only in Greek. Doesn't matter if I don't understand everything, or at the beginning if I don't understand almost anything. It really doesn't matter, because I know that a combination of self-studying plus studying with a teacher, and being curious about that, and being happy, you can learn a lot. But at the same time, I understand that in some cases people don't want that. They want they if they feel too um, if they don't feel comfortable with that, they shouldn't do it, because it's also like you cannot learn if you feel in a of threat, like, or if you don't feel comfortable. So, and then you have to, if you feel comfortable in that way, actually it's very effective. But if you don't, then I can teach also in using like language of instruction can be the language you want. Of course, it should be a language that you understand better than the language you want to learn.
Right, that makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
But yeah, but I also, I maybe you know, but I also give classes in different. So, like, if you want, let's say that you are interested in Italian, but you also want to learn French for your work, and Russian because I don't know, you want to go there on holiday. Then I can help. So also being an simultaneous interpreter, I learn how to not to get confused, like to not to mix languages up. So I can help students to switch from one language to another, and not to mix languages up. This is why then I give multilingual courses in the language. So I teach 13 languages. So, and people can choose the combination they need or they want.
Wow. So I can become a student of yours and I can say I want to learn French and Italian, and you
Yes,
will
sure.
you have a program, or you'll make a program for me and the other students
Yes,
that has this built in sort of.
yes,
That's
yes,
amazing. Why
yes.
why don't more people do this? That sounds really fantastic.
I'm also writing material, so will be published soon. For example, the first thing which will be published is a self-study material to learn at the same time French, Italian, Spanish, and German,
Wow.
and with videos or lots of audio material, and a bit like as if I was teaching you directly. It's not really, it's not an audio course or a video course. It's everything together. There is an interactive PDF where embedded you can have audio and quizzes where you click and see the answer, and then you can also watch videos and so on. So, and it has also multilingual tips, multilingual units, so that you can also learn how to switch from one language to another.
Wow. And I guess the obvious question on that is there's a lot of debate online about how do you learn multiple languages, and some people
Mm-hmm.
say that it's not advisable because you mix them up, and some people are saying no,
Mm-hmm.
you can do it as long as you set some guidelines and you do it in a structured way. What kind of things can people do to themselves? I mean, you mentioned before that interpreters have special skills that or they're taught how to not mix things up, but can you give any examples of any tips that people can use right now to not mix
Yes,
languages up?
sure, sure. I think, um, say, uh, um, I think that in general, human beings do many different things, and they don't mix them up. Uh, the key is actually to so maybe it seems obvious, but I don't. In my experience, not so many people do it. So when you want to speak a language, many people say, okay, I'm going to read. Okay, that's great. It really helps you with vocabulary. Maybe you feel comfortable and you're not, but if you don't speak, of course, you're not going to be able to speak. Like,
Right.
is if I wanted to learn how to drive and then I just read the theory, which is great, but I also need to apply it. And the same thing happens with languages. So if you, this is why I think learning different languages at the same time, if you speak, for example, with a teacher, it's not the only way, but let's say that you speak with a teacher who knows more languages. And then you speak first in one language, then you speak in a different language, and then in a different language. And then you switch to the first one, for example. It's already a way of which helps your brain to keep it separated, because on one end you learn to distinguish them, like now it's Italian time, Now it's French time. Of course, you are not going to say all the words. So the aim is not to say one word in each language. The word is to be able to have a conversation in one language and being able to switch to another language. So what is important is, on one hand, that language features are clear to you. So what is really what differentiates Italian and Spanish, let's say? I mean, I'm talking about similar languages. Or because it's where people get most confused.
Of course.
And so, on one end, to concentrate on language differences, not what is similar, which is very easy for our brain to pick it up. What is different? Why? How can you recognize that the word is Spanish and not Italian? Let's say, for example, Italian words almost never end with a consonant, whereas Spanish words often do, like S at the end for plural. And in Italian, you only have vowels most of the time, apart from a couple of prepositions.
Hmm.
But so already it's a one tip. And then if you learn about language features, and then you learn, you concentrate, you try to, when you learn vocabulary, you can also see how words are different. And you learn, for example, in many cases, you just have to switch for example, let's say that también in Spanish and then también in Portuguese.
Mm.
If you learn how they change, then you can apply the same rule to other words. Like in Spanish, you have juego, and in Italian, gioco. So there is often this we, yo, in like juego, duermo, and in Italian, dormo, gioco. So you have patterns. If you
Mm.
learn to recognize them, you can apply to many more words. And yeah, but I think the key in general is not to be scared to to speak all of them, not at the same time, but yeah, train the brain to change and switch language the way kids do. They speak in a language and then another kid speaks to them in another language. They don't say, sorry, I have to. Yes, they just do it.
Yeah, it sounds simple, but I don't think a lot of people do this at all, if any. Like you're the
Mm-hmm.
first teacher I've heard. I know other people who speak a lot of languages who also do teaching, but I haven't even heard them say something like this. So it might be kind of obvious, but if nobody does it, I would still say it's quite amazing actually. I definitely want to try this.
Ah,
So we can.
in last November, I was in Berlin and I at Expolingua. I don't
Mhm.
know whether you know it. And I gave a workshop where I taught at the same time Hindi, Greek, and Italian.
Okay.
And I chose on purpose languages that I knew that not many people would speak because I wanted people to see first that they can speak from day one, actually after 1 minute, because they can really repeat things. They don't need to know everything to be able to speak, and then they can switch, and everyone, so almost everyone, I mean it was like 40 minutes, they could switch from one language to another, and everyone did that.
It's crazy. It's amazing. And so just differentiating a little bit from the teacher to the student, because I assume you're still busy learning languages yourself. I guess you can't keep you
Yes,
away. Then,
yes.
what kind of strategies do you use yourself as like? How's it different from? Do you try and make your own study environment the same as your students in your teaching, or do you have some other different parts of your method when it's your own? Like, what do you do when you have study time, for instance? What do you work on?
Mhm. So this is a good question. The thing is that I do use some of the techniques I use with my students, actually many of them. Of course, the only thing is that I don't know many I don't know multilingual teachers. So I would be so happy to have a multilingual teacher so that I can practice the languages I really want to practice, the ones that I don't speak so much or not so often. Um, and what I do is, for example, mm, so I try to find time to speak different languages, especially what I tried, for example, lately, for me, in order to practice without having a multilingual teacher because I couldn't really, so I couldn't find one.
Right.
Then I would talk to, I talked. I was speaking, for example, in Portuguese, and a friend of mine was speaking in Spanish. So I didn't want to practice Spanish. I wanted to practice Portuguese, and it still works because I'm practicing, and my friend was practicing, so it was perfect. I could still do that, and everyone was the language that we wanted to practice,
Right.
for example. But in general, I and it does normally the brain doesn't get confused because, for example, my friend didn't know any Portuguese at all, so just helps. Could you can understand each other, although you don't know the language very well. Anyway, what I wanted to say, which is maybe a bit confusing this moment, but what I wanted to say is that I study languages in different ways according to the language I'm studying. I don't study languages 100% in the same way. For example, there are languages where the pronunciation is more difficult. There are languages where the grammar is more difficult. So I focus on what is either more interesting or more difficult for me. And I always try to speak them because my aim is to talk to people in those languages.
Hmm.
But I do a bit of everything. I love grammar, so I study grammar of my own, but I try to practice. And I don't normally mix languages up. Languages which are very similar, yes, sometimes it happened to me, for example, at the beginning between Catalan and Portuguese. Then what I try to do is exactly what I do with my students. I focused on differences and I try to speak those languages more often so that my brain would know, okay, now it's Portuguese time, now it's Catalan.
Right. Make it clear, a clear distinction.
Mhm.
We have to take a quick break, but we'll be right back. When I started learning Russian 4 or 5 years ago, I couldn't really say much, even though I'd learned quite a big vocabulary. I had spent a lot of time on books and flashcards and apps because I didn't really know what else to do. I thought that language evening classes were quite inconvenient and they were quite expensive as well. And I didn't really have anyone to talk to in my little town in Denmark. So I was really lacking speaking practice. I don't know why I hesitated for so long to get on board the tutoring wagon, as it were, and start to get regular online tutoring, because obviously the internet has enabled a connectivity that we've never had before. So when I started to have tutoring lessons in Russian, everything changed. Like I improved so quickly, and I went from not being able to say a full sentence probably to actually having 1 hour long conversations with my tutor. Okay, they were very basic conversations. They're very, she was very patient and it was very slow, but it all took place on italki because they have the biggest selection of tutors. They have great offers where you can, like for instance, now if you go and have a lesson, if you use my link actualfluency.com/italki, you get a $10 free credit, and you can get many tutoring lessons there for less than $10 an hour. So you're essentially just getting a free lesson. The other part is just it's so convenient. You go in, you use the calendar on the side to pick a time that's good for your time zone, and it shows when your teacher is available. And then Italki just does the rest. It sends out the reminders for you, and it takes care of the payment as well, so you don't get scammed by some, questionable teachers out there on the internet. I had a lot of tutoring lessons, and if any one of you have tried learning Russian, you know that you definitely need it. But it wasn't until way later that I realized just how powerful these tutoring lessons were. And now I totally 100% recommend it. Like if you can't do any other work in a language, if you find textbooks boring, or if you find any other method like not your cup of tea, there's nothing that beats the speed of which you learn from a personal one-on-one tutor, and you can find thousands of them on italki. That's italki, and like I said, you can get a free $10 credit if you use my link actualfluency.com/italki. And now let's get back to the episode. Grammar is obviously something that a lot of people struggle with as well. I think sometimes it's because it feels like it's far away from what you want to achieve, speaking the language, but obviously some
Mhm.
languages there's so much grammar that you can't really speak without it. something like Hungarian, for
Mm,
instance, would be hard for anyone
yeah.
to speak in any
Yeah.
way if you don't understand the grammar system,
Mm-hmm.
the what do you call them, the words at the end,
Yeah,
agglutinative.
postpone. Okay, in verbatim. Okay, word order, but actually in our Hungarian, what is quite peculiar, but also in Turkish, is postposition. So you have so many things added at the end of a word,
Exactly.
then yeah, you cannot even recognize the word anymore if you don't know that the language does that.
Exactly. That's why I found Hungarian really hard, because when you're doing, let's say you're just doing flashcards or you're trying to learn vocabulary,
Hmm.
sometimes it's
Hmm.
hard to see if you is this a new word or is it some kind of conjugated version of an already existing
Hmm.
word. And what forms do you
Hmm.
learn anyway when you have 50 different endings you can add to a word? It's very tricky.
Hmm.
How did you find it? Did you studied it at university as well? How did they attack it in the curriculum there?
Hmm. Sorry, I would say more than in so if you want, I can answer I can answer the question about university. But what I think in general that languages where grammar is very difficult or more complicated or just different from your mother tongue, what I think is that what I always do is to learn structures because structures are like things that you can use changing a couple of words and still being able to say so much. For example, I don't know. So, so my suggestion in general, actually, may I talk about Russian for a second because it's also quite a complicated language
Oh yeah,
for
please. That's
grammar.
also
Yeah.
one of my target languages.
Ah,
So yeah,
okay. So, for example, in Russian, if you learn certain things, then you can apply the same rule, the same pattern, the same idea to so many other either verbs or words and then, um, for example, I don't teach Russian in the very classical way. I want people to be able to speak from day one. So I don't want to start just with the letters and then after months people can read and then no. For me, people, especially with languages with a scary alphabet. When I say scary, I mean just different, and or where yeah, I think speaking from the very beginning and applying, for example, in Russian, past tense is not difficult at all. What is difficult, okay, are aspects of the verb.
mm,
But the past tense is very easy. Most times you just add l for masculine, for example, and then you can already say yeah, DLL. So, okay, I'm talking like a man, okay, because I said just L, it's for men. Yeah, DLL, yeah, yeah, yell, and so on. So you can already say so many things without being fluent in the language, and I think it's great. It gives you motivation. You can already start talking to people and yeah, so I the same for me is for Hungarian. I wouldn't study like in the classical way. When I say that I love grammar, I love understanding how languages work. But then I try to teach or to learn in a way it makes sense to me.
sure.
So I don't want to start in the classical way, like one word and then plural, and then the exceptions. I think I want to learn vocabulary which is relevant to me and to what I want to say, to my life, to my hobbies, because it's what you talk about at the beginning, and or what you talk about normally when you meet someone. And then add the new things. So I call it a bit like way of learning. You know, one layer and then the other. You go back and then add new structures, new things. But the everything is connected. The language is a structure, is a system anyway.
Yeah, and it's context, isn't it? With the grammar-heavy languages, if you can learn the context of each ending or how conjugation, then you're not really bothering so much about the rule itself. You're more seeing it in practice and applying it. You don't necessarily need to know why it is like that if you just have that pattern or experience in your head.
Yeah, so maybe in some cases it's important to understand. So at some point in languages like Russian or German, it's important to understand about cases. But of course, it's much more interesting to understand it in practice instead of just in theory. So if you say many sentences using, let's say, accusative, at some point you understand why you use it and how you use it. Much better than just reading them. So this is why I think speaking is so important because your brain. So there are two ways. There is passive and active learning, and active is by speaking or so by producing. So either speaking or writing. And since most people don't like writing anyway, then it's much better to speak, and then you have fun. You can talk to people. You can see that you can actually communicate, and they can talk to you. I think it's a very nice way to apply grammar. So normally when I teach, I teach a structure that you can use, and then we use it in conversations that you can apply straight away. It's not like I don't want students to go home or just switch off the computer and not be able to use what we went through. I think it's very important to see that whatever you learn, you already apply it. And if you cannot apply it, it's because you don't need it actually.
Right, and that's kind of the old-fashioned way of teaching, where you're
Yes.
building this foundation that will someday be useful once you've learned a lot.
Yes.
Which is so
Yes.
it's so strange that we in our school system have this opposite focus, or at least I
Mm-hmm.
mean I know I've heard stories of some good teachers out there, and some maybe it's different
Mm-hmm.
from country to country as well. But most of the people I know had just it's just basically vocabulary learning and just maybe reading,
Mm-hmm.
but no actual
Mm-hmm.
conversation, or very limited anyway.
Yes.
So
Mm-hmm.
you end up with this. I mean, I guess it's better than nothing, but you end up with this level
Mm-hmm.
where you can probably read and understand a lot, but when it comes to actual
Mm-hmm.
production, you're just absolutely hopeless because you've never done it. And
Mm-hmm.
that goes back to what you said in the beginning of how do you how do you learn multiple languages? You said, well, you just need to practice them together, or in a context of each other. Because if you
Mm-hmm.
learn Spanish for one day and then Italian for one day, you're not really teaching the brain how to do it at the same time.
No.
So of course you get
Mm-hmm.
confused, and it seems simple, but I haven't heard it before either. So that's quite that's quite nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What languages do you are you studying languages at the moment?
Yeah, so well, always I would say, but that's a very very weak term. What I what I have is I've English, Danish, and German pretty well. And
Mm-hmm.
my spoken German and my German grammar is still terrible. I just guess many of the endings, but I guess it's kind of a flexible language in that the endings aren't 100% critical for understanding. So I've reached a level where I'm happy with the what I can do with it. And then I've studied Russian for a couple of years, but never really broke through. I'm starting to go back into lessons now to try and help me speak better because my vocabulary is doing really well. I feel like I have a good grip on the grammar now.
Mm-hmm.
But that's my main focus. But I'm also working full time. I also just moved country, so it's kind of a low priority project.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm starting to get into. I'm just now this week doing some italki lessons again, trying to find some
Mm-hmm.
teachers that kind of apply to what I want to achieve, and mainly conversational practice really. And I try to watch vlogs on YouTube where people speak very naturally
Mm-hmm.
to try and improve that. But yeah, I lived in Hungary for a year and a half as well, so I did study some Hungarian. But in some part, I always knew I was not going to live there forever, so it was a very low effort. But I do love the language, and I have a feeling I will get back to it later on because it's very unique, and I really like the sound of it as well.
Yes.
So those are kind of the languages, and of course French and Spanish. Kind of you can almost read it without ever studying. I feel like if you know some of the other languages, and
Mm-hmm.
I
Yes.
always feel guilty for not having studied that more. I had a bit of French in school, so pronunciation and understanding is pretty good for a complete beginner, but I haven't actually ever studied it. And then of course Swedish and Norwegian. Well, that's just like my
Mm-hmm.
native language, so
Mm-hmm.
I can speak and understand them. Well, I can understand them at 99%, but speaking is weird because I'm never sure when I speak Swedish, Norwegian, and Danish because you have to guess every time.
Oh.
So is this a Swedish word? Is this a Norwegian word? I'm not sure. And you kind of scroll
Oh.
through the options. But I work in an office with Swedish and Norwegian colleagues, so I try to, whenever possible, to try and learn more. And obviously, when they speak, I can understand everything because it's this pretty much the same language. But we have all these
Mhm.
differences that can be quite tricky to get right.
Mhm.
And that's why I say I don't speak them. I know them very well. So that's it.
Oh, interesting. Wow, that's a lot. That's very interesting.
Yeah, it's fun, and I definitely wanna. My focus is more of improving what I've already started. I could go do more French or Spanish or Italian even, or even an Asian language, which is something I've always been thinking about as well. But for now, I think with everything else that's going on, I would just like to improve the languages that I know, and for me, that's just speaking more and practicing more from my
Mhm.
maybe even starting to do some writing. I know you said people never write, and I'm definitely no exception. So I would like to write more, just to maybe practice some of those concepts and get better at it,
Mhm.
because that's the only way, right? We practice to get better.
Yes. So people, yeah, I think it's more because when you want to, if you want to talk to friends, you want to be quick and you want to make jokes. So you're not going to use, if your level is not good enough, you're going to switch maybe to English. And if you want to write, yeah, you want to be able to express yourself. I think adults are used to be able to express themselves, and when they cannot, they get frustrated, of course.
Hmm.
And then, yeah, I think we forgot that in order to learn something, we have to go through a phase where we feel stupid.
Yeah,
Yeah, and it's just a phase. It's just like don't give up, keep trying, and at some point you say, "Oh, but I can speak the language." Actually, as I said, I think you can already speak it from the beginning. But I mean, of course, it takes time. But I mean, as adults, we forgot that. I think most people forgot that that in order to learn something, so it's a process. You do it, and then you get a bit better, and then a bit better, and at some point, you're very happy about what you know. So,
yeah, hopefully. And obviously going to the conferences and meetups is a good way to find multilinguals, who can where you can practice in multiple languages. Is that your
mhm,
primary ambition for going to the conferences? I've seen you a couple of times at the events,
mhm,
and you've also spoken, had some interesting talks there. But that's maybe a tip for people if they can't find somebody who speaks three or four languages to practice with, because obviously that's a good way to practice the mixing up as well, is to just mix them mix
mhm.
them up in the same conversation. So that's a good place to go. I feel like for that kind, you could definitely find some interesting people to talk to in many languages at these events.
Yeah, so yeah, so normally I don't go to conferences because I want to speak the languages. I go there because I'm so happy that I can find other people who love languages. Then the consequence of it is that then we end up speaking different languages. But for me, the main focus of why I learn languages or why I go there is the connection with people, and I love so I like so much that I can find other people who are as in love with languages as I am. It's a very nice thing that where you can share your passion with other people. And yeah, you can also find people who want to practice the same languages as you want, and then yeah, you can. Yeah, I think it's a good place. So for sure, there if you want to. So no one obliges you to speak in another language, but if you want to, it's a very good place where you can switch from one language to another.
Yeah, there's no pressure for sure. That's a good point to emphasize, because some people do feel when they
Mhm,
read about the events, it's like, oh, I only
mhm,
know English and Spanish. People are gonna make fun of me or say I'm stupid or something. No, that's so far from the truth. I think I've gone to some of these conferences speaking only English because there's so many of my friends that I've gotten to know over the
mhm.
years that I only see at these events. And so for us, it's more important to catch up and what's been going on instead of
Yes.
speaking in
Mm,
our, let's say, third or fourth language, even though that happens, of course, as well.
mhm,
And I would say I'm probably more happy when people come to me and speak in Danish, because that's kind of unusual that people learn this language. So
mhm,
when people come up to me and speak Danish, that's always good fun. and I always try and be patient and listen to people as they try the very difficult pronunciation that we have. With
Yes.
the,
I
the
know, I know.
yeah, you looked
Yes.
into it as well.
Yes, I looked into so many languages. I love to understand how languages work, and also helps me to understand, for example, what could be difficult for people. For example, I don't know, even if I don't know a language so well, if I studied it for a while, I already know, for example, let's say that, yeah, I know what kind of difficulties could a person of native speaker of that language have learning a different language. And
Mhm.
I think it really helps. I can understand where problems could arise, and I can help in advance, or yeah. So
Can you
it's
give some examples of maybe for different
yeah.
languages what people generally struggle with, or maybe what native speakers of certain languages maybe struggle with in general? Just some ideas.
Mm-hmm. For example, the usage of the verb to travel in Italian is different from the way you would use it in English. So you can have a one-to-one translation, like to travel, viaggiare, but we don't know. We never say I travel to, I don't know, the UK, or I travel to. Normally, when we say viaggiare, we use it as a general thing, like I like traveling. Mi
Mm-hmm.
piace viaggiare. Or, for example, I travel a lot. Viaggio molto, viaggio spesso, something like that. So we don't use it with a specific reference to a place. I already know that I have to talk about that, because normally when we say I went somewhere or I traveled to a certain place, we normally use either the verb to go, andare,
Mm-hmm.
or partire, but then we need a different preposition. Partire per l'Italia, partire per la Spagna, or just very, very often we just say sono andata in Italia, sono andata in Spagna. And this is if I know it in advance, I already know that it's something that I can already automatically explain so that people know that there is a
Mm.
difference, for example. Or for pronunciation, for something else, for example, in um, or for example, if they make a mistake while I know the language and I know where it comes from, so I know that maybe it's just a translation of what they would say in their native language, and I know whether it can be a recurrent mistake or just a random mistake. So of course, I'm not. I don't think all mistakes should be corrected. I think it's important to understand whether it's just because you are nervous in that moment, you're being nervous, or just because it's something that you understood in the wrong way. And of course, in the second case, I'll try to help. In the first one, it's not like an exam. I don't want
Right.
people to get stressed. Yeah.
Yeah, it's better to speak and have a fluid conversation that just goes on. As long as the understanding is not lost, then you
Mm-hmm.
can correct it if it comes up again and again. For teachers
Mm-hmm.
out there, that's probably a good point to write down
Mm-hmm.
that. And I definitely feel like if somebody corrects every mistake I make, that I can't really have a
Mm-hmm.
conversation like that, so
Yeah.
that doesn't
Yes.
work. But
Mm-hmm.
but if there are really serious mistakes that actually mean that
Yes.
okay, I don't understand what you're saying, even then maybe just say,
Yes.
can
That.
you say that in another way,
Mm.
or what do you mean when you say this, or something like that.
Or so I normally, I think it's very important to correct the communicative mistakes, like maybe the sentence is completely normal, but for example, let's say another what, in an example, something that actually I always say is that in Italy, normally when you say, sorry, so do you want to come to my party tomorrow, in Italy we never say just no,
Right.
sorry, I can't, and that's it. We always give a reason. So it's not really just the language, but it's also the culture.
Yeah.
If you want to be invited again, you should give a reason. Doesn't matter how, I don't know, how you don't, yeah, like, sorry, I had to work, sorry, I have lots to do, but really not say anything. It's culturally not so nice. It's just like, I can't and I don't care. This
Yeah.
is the message, actually. So, and this thing is much more important than a couple of grammatical mistakes, grammar mistake and
Of course.
mistakes. And the other, yes, and the other thing is that I think many people forget. that there is a difference between accuracy and fluency,
Mm-hmm.
in the sense that when we speak, we cannot focus on both things at the same time, especially at the beginning. So either we speak fluently or we try to achieve fluency. And in that case, the teacher cannot say all the time, it's not correct, it's not correct.
Yeah.
I mean, how can you achieve fluency if you cannot even finish your sentence?
Yeah.
At the same time, there will be phases where your aim is accuracy, maybe to improve a certain things or a certain structure, or in that case, yes, because the focus is accuracy, but cannot be accuracy for 1 hour. Your
Sure.
brain cannot work in that way. Yeah. So I think, and actually, there are people who want to be corrected all the time. I think if your level is really high, then for example, I don't mind to be corrected all the time if my level is very high, because otherwise I will never get rid of those small things that. But if my level is A1, there is no point in correcting every single word, because I don't even know the grammar behind it.
Mm. Yeah, and there's too much just to get started. It's better to focus on the big wins and just keeping that fluency or attempting to be
Mhm.
more fluent conversation and just
Mhm.
encourage, which I think is also something that goes
Yes,
missing sometimes,
yes,
is
very important. Yes.
if you
Hmm.
speak from day one, or that's kind of
Yes.
like the Michel Thomas approach as well, just get people speaking from minute one and actually get them. It sounds like that's what you're doing as well. You get them you almost impress the students with how quickly they can actually form a useful
Yes.
sentence,
Yeah.
and then they're really excited and they're like, "Whoa!" Of course, they might hit that a bit of a plateau quite quick, and then it's a little bit harder, of course. But getting them excited to begin with must be a big priority for a teacher, right?
Yes, I think it's very important. For example, myself, I get motivated by my progress.
Yeah.
If I don't see any progress, I will stop. So, of course, you have to see that you can do it. The thing is that many people think, I wasn't good at school, so I'm not good at languages. I don't believe that people are not good at languages. I think either the method was not right or the moment was not right. But
Mm.
anyone can learn language. Languages are not like the example that I like to make it, because I don't understand anything about it, is like it's not quantum physics.
Right.
So I don't understand it. In order to study, to study quantum physics, I have to study so many other things that by the time I can study that, then I will have studied math and many other basic, not in the sense of easy, but basic things. And with languages, you can start straight away. You don't need to there are even ways to learn certain things which are already advanced, but taught in a certain way that they can you already use them from the very beginning.
Yeah.
So, for example, I was thinking about if you want to learn one verb and all the persons and all the
Oh
exceptions,
yeah, yeah.
you cannot do it. But if you want to say, okay, I want to learn how to say, for example, I don't know, if I had more time, I would study more. I mean, okay, it's not the easiest thing to learn, but you can is a structure which is constructed almost in the same way all the time. So you just change a couple of words. If I had time, if I had money, if I had something else. So
Yeah.
you one word, you learn a structure, and then you can already say many more things than you think was possible.
Yeah, and I would say also the what I realized about that particular challenge of, let's say you have something you'd like to say, if you use your
Mm.
native language or whatever, then it can be a really good exercise to try and really simplify it. Because
Yes.
this, like I was studying the little language Tokipona, 120 words or whatever, and
Mhm.
when you're trying to make sentences with a 120 word vocabulary, it really forces you
Mhm.
to. This is why actually I would encourage people to spend a weekend or something on Tokipona, because the language itself I would find mostly useless. I mean, there's no real practical
Mhm.
use, but
Mhm.
in terms of helping you learn languages, I think it's a great use of time, because what it does, it really helps
Mhm.
you to understand that everything we say is a
Mhm.
translation of our thoughts. So when I say something
Yes.
in English, what I'm really doing is I'm taking a thought I have and I'm putting words to it. So I'm not really, it's not a direct, thought to word because you can't speak that fast anyway. But for Tokipono, what I learned was that you have to simplify everything so much. So for instance,
Mm-hmm.
when you say goodbye, for instance, in Tokipono, it's just, I'm leaving. I leave,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Ah.
And it's a
Mm-hmm.
beautiful concept because what I was doing in Russian, which I was doing like, okay, I have this English sentence in my head. How do I say it in
Mm-hmm.
Russian? And of course, that's
Yes.
impossible. First of all,
Yes.
my level in
Mm-hmm.
English is infinitely higher than my Russian, so the sentences
Mm-hmm.
are more likely to be complicated. But also, they're two completely different ways of speaking. Like they
Mm-hmm.
speak, it's such a different language. Okay, you can maybe do it with, French and Spanish, Italian. They have kind of similar structures in some cases, so maybe that's easier. But for me, it's all about taking that sentence and really boiling it down to the absolute bare minimum. What are you trying to say, really?
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't say it
Mm.
as you thought it up, then try and just go deeper and say, what is the actual meaning? Like instead of saying, um, could you show me where the toilet is? You can really
Mm-hmm.
simplify it out to where toilet, basically, if you want to speak like
Mm-hmm.
Tarzan, right?
Mm-hmm.
But that
And
really
then
helped me.
smile.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah,
maybe
of
it
course,
helps. If
of
you don't know, please, you can still smile or try to make you understand that you are grateful for an answer. So it's
exactly. You can use body
have to
language
know
or
all the words. Mm-hmm.
nonverbal
Yes.
communication, and for Russian as well. I think that I use a lot of. I try to speak around it in a way, and I ask, "What does that mean? How do you say that?" And even if I have to put in the English word, like, "How do you say English word?" I would still say
Mm-hmm.
that's a big improvement over not speaking at all.
Yes.
So I'm okay
Mm-hmm.
with that, and that goes back to what you said about we have to be stupid for a phase because obviously you can't learn language in a week or overnight. So accepting that we'll be sounding a little bit silly for a while is also important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I never meant like uh, we feel stupid, but we don't understand that other people will not think the same. So it's not
Ah,
an exam.
right.
We feel it as if it was an exam. But no, in real life, what people want to do when they talk to each other is understand each other or to achieve a common goal, which can be also understanding each other. So and there are certain things which are much more important than just getting everything right. So if you let's say that I was talking to someone and whose language was a bit like broken, and for me, if the person shows interest in talking like to me or about a certain topic, or if the person seems motivated, is much more important than getting everything correctly. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And uh, and for example, the other thing is that when people and what you said about simplifying is really true because sometimes we sometimes people feel frustrated because they cannot express themselves in the same way as they can do in their native language, but actually simplifying is good. People can understand you, you can communicate, you can still reach an of course if you want to be an interpreter is not is not enough, but I mean not everyone wants to do that, so or to arrive there, to get there, you still need to go through other phases, so which is also okay. And simplifying is great. And the other thing I really would suggest people, and I always do suggest my students to do that, is finish your sentences. Because many people are afraid to make mistakes, so they start a sentence and then they don't continue.
Mm,
And since speaking or talking to someone has a communicative purpose, if I finish my sentence, but not everything is correct, you can still understand me. I'm sure I made some mistakes while speaking today. So the thing is, you could still understand me because I finished my sentences. If I don't finish my sentences, you have no idea what the other person wants to say. So you cannot even help to. For example, it has happened to you for sure. If someone was trying to speak Danish with you, they didn't know a word, but if they pronounce it in the wrong way, or if they still said something, you said, "Ah, do you mean?" Mm-hmm.
exactly.
Let's
Yeah.
say. And then the communication goes on, doesn't matter. You don't have to know all the words. You cannot start speaking once you have learned the whole vocabulary. And then you can still, as you said, you can say, or the way when I learned German, I didn't know everything, but then I tried in a certain way, and then I said, how do you say that? Wie sagst du das? Or wie sagt man das? And so on. So I would still try to use German, as you said, for you do for Russian, but doing whatever I could. And if you finish your sentences, people can help you if they have interest in talking to you, of course. I mean,
Yeah, hopefully.
no. What I mean is that let's imagine that I don't know. You talk to someone on the street and you don't know each other. Maybe the person doesn't have 1 hour to talk to you, but doesn't matter. If you're talking to someone, let's say you are at a party and you have a feeling that you can understand each other well, but the language is in, so doesn't, so it's a bit difficult for one of you, then you can still communicate and you can still understand each other and have real fun. I think it happened to you that you didn't speak a language, but you could still laugh and have great fun, although your level was not C1 or C2, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah, like definitely. I've recorded some of my first Russian tutoring lessons in the first year, and I'm thinking about that. That's quite a long time ago now. It feels kind of time flies, and for me, it's just natural to do that. So even if I didn't speak that very well, I would still try to make some jokes or something just
Mhm,
to make it fun. I mean, they're very simple, right? But
mhm,
for me, that's important as well, that you carry on your personality into what you're
mhm,
trying to do in the new language, even though you don't have a sophisticated way of doing it. There are
mhm,
ways that you can, I would say, infer it.
mhm.
Like when if people ask me in Russian if I speak Russian, I say I certainly try to. You know,
Nice.
it's a very simple one to do. Or they ask me how many languages do you speak, and I'm like, I don't know if I speak any of them. Because it's always hard to define,
Yeah.
especially as we mentioned with the Swedish and Norwegian. Can I say that I speak Swedish just because I know some words, but I can understand everything that's being
Mhm,
said? I would
mhm,
not say so. So it's quite complicated anyway. But it's been a blast to talk to you today, and I think that this is part of the reason why I love doing this podcast as well. Is there's so many new ideas that come out of every single episode, and I'm really grateful that you took the time today to come on and share some of your ideas about teaching and learning languages. Just as a final note, where can
mhm.
people find out more about you, and if people want to maybe uh, get some teaching from you, where do you have any availability or any practical information people should know if they want to start learning some languages from you?
Sure. So, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. It has been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much. And people can find me on my website, which is www.speakfromdayoneWithElisa.com. And you can also find me on Facebook and Instagram with the same name. And yeah, so and there you also find soon, like I said, in the next month, you're going to find lots of multilingual material if you want to more something like either to study on your own or a video course or something like that. So podcasts and so on.
Fantastic. I'm looking forward to it. I think you're really helping to make a big development in the polyglot world, because I think people are waking up to the idea of learning multiple languages at once, and the power of it. And this is just kind of the beginning of the whole movement. It's, what is it, 10, 15 years ago since we heard about, maybe not even, probably less. So it's really exciting to see all this stuff coming out now, and I think it's going to be a game changer, really. So I'll definitely be looking out for that personally.
Thank you very much.
All
Thank
right.
you very much for your time. And
Likewise, and look forward to seeing you around the world. To be in Bratislava for the gathering next time.
of course, yeah,
Okay,
see you there
see
then.
you there then, definitely. Good evening.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Actual Fluency Podcast. I really appreciate having you here today. To Just before you leave, I just want to give a quick shout out to today's sponsor, which is italki. Italki is a tutoring platform where you can find affordable tutors for every language in the world pretty much. So get started today and get a free $10 credit when you book your first lesson. If you go to actualfluency.com/italki, that's spelled Italki. So give it a go and feel how tutoring can really boost and enhance your language learning